So we've heard a lot recently
Okay.
about the science of reading and also why structured literacy programs are really needed in our schools. And there's a big movement in California towards that. But can you help us understand how that applies to kids with disabilities?
So the science of reading, is although it recently seems like it's become this new thing that we've just heard of. We've had probably 3 decades of science on the best way to teach students how to read. And so the science of reading, most of the research that has been conducted under the science of reading has targeted students either who are at risk for developing a disability or do have a disability. And again, most of that work has targeted students with specific learning disabilities or dyslexia or being at risk for those things. So when we start talking about students with more extensive support needs or students with cognitive disabilities, that research is a bit more recent. And so we have really spent the last decade trying to figure out, okay, what components of the science of reading actually work with students with Down syndrome or students with other intellectual and developmental disabilities. And through that body of work, we've really shown that the science of reading still is very important for this group of learners. And many of the strategies, so including focusing on those big five, phonological awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension, providing instruction that's very explicit and systematic, those are things that are highly beneficial to this population of students. I think some of the things that we see we might need to just take into a little more consideration for this population are some limits on working memory and how we scaffold that. Um, Thinking about data collection and how we, make sure that we're providing teachers with good information and, good data. And then I think one of the things that I think is also interesting is just the timing of learning. That, when we're thinking about maybe students who are now moving into middle school, but they're still working on early phonics skills. How do we do that in ways that are age appropriate, that are interesting? And then I also think it's important that we're always in the context of reading with this population of learners, that we're always kind of projecting forward to age 22, when students finish with the IDEA, K to 21 school system and thinking about, employment, independence, life satisfaction. And I do think it's really interesting as we're considering reading for this population to make sure that we're really being more comprehensive than we might be for other learners.
Do we have enough special education teachers who are trained in teaching reading to students with disabilities?
In general, no, we absolutely don't. I mean, we don't have enough special ed teachers, period. We don't have enough special ed teachers who have a really deep understanding of how readers develop. And I'll just add one amendment to that. We also have many paraeducators or support staff in special ed classrooms who are incredibly valuable reading intervention people when they are trained. And so we also don't have that population of educators that know enough about reading. But it really depends on the program that they went through. Um, I think in places where we do offer different levels of certification, teachers who are getting certified to work with students with more extensive support needs in those in California, a lot of these students are served in self or special day classes, and many times those teachers have very little training on reading. And when they have received reading training, they often people think, oh, we just should do functional reading and sight words, and that's where it ends. And I think we often those teachers, often family members, society, and those teachers just have very low expectations of the level of literacy this population of learners will attain. And, through the research that I just mentioned over the last decade, we've seen that learners with more extensive support needs can become independent readers and can really, reading is an important skill to focus on and teach them. And so we just need to continue doing more and more work helping this group of teachers, really understand the possibilities of where we can go with improving reading the skills, why it's important, how it fosters inclusion, and making sure that they understand evidence-based practices to support these learners.
What about non-speaking children? Very often people think that non-speaking children can't learn to read, but isn't that more of a challenge for us of how we know they're reading?
Yes, yes. And many children, so I work with many children with Down syndrome. That's the primary population. And most children with Down syndrome are not speaking or, are speaking very little at the time when I would first see them or start working with them. And through this clinic at the university with my students, we took a lot of common assessments that are used for children who do speak, and we adapted them so that children could respond without speaking. So a lot of the core assessments that people use, it's very easy to turn around, how you ask the question to the child. Instead of saying, what sound does this letter make? You would make the sound and have an array of, three letters, and the child could point. So in that way, we were able to find out where is this child in their development? And as soon as you know that, then it can kind of flow. We looked at a lot of the research on teaching reading to children who are deaf and who don't speak. And a lot of that is very useful because it was exactly what we had done. It's taking what we know about reading and presenting it to children so they can respond to us, so that we can see where they are, in a nonverbal way. And that was very successful. We were pretty excited about that when we first started because it opened up a whole new avenue for these kids. And so often in my work, I find that kids know so much more than we think they know. And we can't go on assumptions that they're not ready or they can't or they won't, because if we do that, we're just losing time.
So children who are past like third grade or may even be in middle school and high school and still not strong readers, um, they might need other ways to access the stuff in the classroom that is being taught with text, with the written word, right? So
Right.
what do you recommend for that? And do you think if they go completely to things being read aloud to them, are they not getting enough reading practice?
I think that it is kind of a trade-off, but that in a content area class, the focus should be on learning the content. And if a child is reading below grade, they're not going to learn the content by reading the text themselves. And so I think that even though it would give them more reading time, I don't think it's productive reading time. So however that information can best be conveyed is what I think we should go with. So for some kids, depending on the gap, how big the gap is, there may be material that's at a lower level that gives, the same overview. I think it's critical that someone is looking at what are the most important concepts, so the child's not focusing on, some minuscule little, fact when the bigger picture is getting lost. So, these are the important concepts, and this is how we're going to convey that, either through reading material that's accessible to that student, text read aloud, video, audio, YouTube. We have tons of choices now after the pandemic, when we had to problem solve all of that. So I think the most important thing is to be sure the child is getting the content in a way that they can access and understand. And that brings up another issue about the reading. They do need to have more opportunities to read, and that is where I think parents can really be helpful about increasing their reading time at home. In order to make up for that. One of the most important concepts, and I remember learning about it like in the 70s in my initial teacher preparation, is called embedded instruction. And so what this is the opportunity to practice something that you're learning with someone who can give you feedback. Because kids with Down syndrome, intellectual disabilities, they're going to need many, many, many more repetitions of a skill in order to master it. And so trying to work that repetition into a school day, it's not possible really to get the level of intensity. But also we know that when kids are practicing something in context, in the course of their day in a regular activity, that is actually more powerful. So if a child is, for example, learning that digraph, so SH says sh, What parents can do is anytime, at home, a word comes up that begins with that digraph, they can be saying, oh, ship. Ship starts with, that one little tiny, that's actually a learning trial, They can label all of the things in the house that start with SH. They can bring in things that start with SH. They can tell the babysitter, the bus driver, that way all throughout the child's day, they're getting this reinforcement. SH says shh, and this is what it looks like. So that is by far I think the most important things that parents can do is to support, assuming that they have, good reading instruction, to support that through these repeated trials that are not going to disrupt their day. They don't stop and take anything out or do it in a way where the kid is like, oh, there she goes again. It's just really quick, but it can be very powerful over time because it gives that added practice. And the other thing is just to read to kids. I mean, we hear that, but I think that we don't realize how important that is, to read and talk about what you're reading. For older kids, like if the child's working on the main idea, which is such a difficult concept, to read and just take a minute to say, what do you think the most important thing was, or whatever language your child understands. And you do that enough times, and kids will start to, they'll move forward in their learning just from that added practice.